Hey, friends. Hope you're doing well. I'm recording this really early in the morning. It's raining outside, so I'm inside. But I wanted to talk about Townes Van Zandt. Townes passed away on New Year's Day, 1997. Now, since this is New Year's Day, I wanted to talk about him. I talked about Hank Williams passing away on New Year's Day yesterday, so if you haven't seen that, be sure and give that a look. But whenever I go to listen to Townes, I'm always drawn to his live recordings, the acoustic stuff, just him and a guitar mostly, or with a guitar accompaniment. And I was driving back from Nashville a few days back, and I was looking for some Townes to listen to. And I was looking on the streaming services, and there's no rearview mirror or live from the old quarter. I couldn't find those anywhere. I thought, well, what the hell's up with that? But there's a lot of the studio albums on there, probably all the studio albums on there. And I saw Highway Kind. That's another one of my go-tos. Maybe I should ask right up front, if you're going to listen to Townes today on the anniversary of his passing away, what would you listen to? What song would you put on if it was just a song? What album, if you're going to listen to an album? That's kind of where I'm starting with this, is I would go for Live at the Old Quarter or Rearview Mirror or Highway Kind. And Highway Kind, when I was driving, was actually on the streaming services, so I listened to that. And I was listening. I mean, it's great. I really dig Townes when he's older and he has this roughness in his voice. He's not singing great, but he's delivering the song in such a beautiful, beautiful way to me. There's so much heart and feeling. Like I like it when things err on the side of heart and human, frailty, just opening up. I like that much better than when things are technically perfect. That's not always exciting to me. But on Highway Kind, that album, which is just a collection of some live recordings and sound like they might have been some demos or something like that. He seems really vulnerable and frail, and I like it. It sounds like a blues man. I mean, I realize that he saw himself in that way where he loved the blues and Lightning Hopkins, and it feels like that's the album for me where he reached across that folk divide or whatever and was like right into blues, which those are just names anyway that don't mean anything. What we call things don't matter. What things are or what they matter or what matters. But so I listen to that. And also when you start listening closely and getting particular, because it's hard when you played music forever not to listen to sounds and things like that, arrangements. And I'm listening, and his guitar on some of the stuff, it's obvious it's a board recording just through the soundboard. And there's nothing that sounds worse than a guitar plugged into a soundboard and then recorded there, because it's just quacky and not good. And a couple of songs, his guitar really sounds terrible. But the song, the event of listening to this moment in time, this thing that was documented, is great. His voice carries it. The guitar, you forget about it being quacky. It's the things that we think about when we're in a recording studio. It's like, oh, I don't like the sound of my guitar. But then when you hear the whole thing and you're just a listener, it's like, this is great. It's beautiful and intimate, and it's a good lesson to have that reinforced from Townes. Like when you hear some of those guitar sounds, you'd never go for that. And on the studio recordings or in the demos, other parts of that album, his guitar sounded really, really great. So I'm not ragging on that at all. But I wanted to talk about, since he's the anniversary of his passing, I figured I would look up some newspaper archives and see what was reported at the time about Townes passing away. And when you think of Townes in 1997, he really wasn't a famous person. Like you think of this person now as someone who has had a movie made about him, and like people all over YouTube talk about him and so many fans. It wasn't that big. He would come to your town and he might play some crappy sports bar, which there was a gig here in Indianapolis that I have friends that went to and said he played at some terrible sports bar, and people ignored him and didn't care. And that was pretty late in his life. And that would happen. And then you get lucky and go play a theater in Cincinnati. It was a good gig, a great gig. But you could have gotten Townes Van Zandt to come play in your living room. If you wouldn't have to be a rich person. You could have made an offer. And if he was coming through, or if it was close to Nashville, you could have gotten him to play in your living room as a house concert or a living room show or whatever. I don't think people think about Townes Van Zandt like that. But that was a thing that could have happened and probably did happen. So I want you to think of him as that way. But it's interesting that right when he passed away, there were all these people that are spread out. Like now we have the internet, where all of these people, those of you who are watching this, are kind of all over the world. A lot of you may not be within 100 miles of each other, but there's a lot of you, and back then, this is one of those events where Townes Van Zandt passes away, and you find out that people did care in all these places. There was 2 different obituaries, like nice obituaries written in London newspapers, in The Guardian, and then I forget, was it the Daily News? I forget what the name of it. You can hear Frankie meowing outside my door. I apologize. He wants to come in and talk about Townes. I might have to let him in here in a second. But Perth, Australia, there was a few different newspapers in Australia that talked about Townes passing away. There was all over the United States. There was a really nice write-up in Ottawa, Canada, Calgary. Still a lot of different places. People knew about Townes. And if you think about a person of that size, that's really remarkable. But, the people that loved him a lot. But I wanted to share some stuff that was written in the Austin American-Statesman newspaper. They really went above and beyond and did a great job of covering it. And I want to share a little bit written by Michael Corcoran, who's a friend of this channel. I have shared things that Michael has written in the past and talked to Michael about that, and he's become a friend of this show. And he has a website. I don't know what to call it, a newsletter, a blog, but he has a collection of a bunch of things that he's written that if you watch this channel, you will absolutely love it. And I've plugged it before on here before, but I'm going to put a link down in the comments. I might pin it to the top. So you can go there and check that out and subscribe to that and tell him Otis sent you. And I think I've said that once or twice before, and he got back and said a lot of people followed through. And so I'd like for you guys to support him in that. But this was written in 1997. I believe the date was on January 3rd, probably when the word got out. But this is on the front page of the newspaper in Austin. A journey ends for musical drifter. Townes Van Zandt, a songwriter, is dead at age 52, by Michael Corcoran, American-Statesman music writer. Austin's music community was overcome with sadness, if not surprise, at the news that Townes Van Zandt, whose rich narrative style influenced a generation of Texas songwriters, died of a heart attack Wednesday night at his home near Nashville. His daughter, Katie Bell, came running in, said, "Daddy's having a fight with his heart." Daddy's having a fight with his heart. Beverly Paul of Van Zandt's Sugar Hill label said they rushed into the room and Townes was already gone. The writer of such country hits as Poncho and Lefty, Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson, and If I Needed You, Emmylou Harris and Don Williams, was 52 years old. It wasn't the hits, however, but a stark and penetrating body of work that gave Van Zandt the reputation as a songwriter. Such early Van Zandt albums His 1968's For the Sake of the Song and 1969's Our Mother the Mountain inspired such Texas songsmiths as Steve Earle, Jimmy Dale Gilmore, Nancy Griffith, Robert Earl Keen, Lyle Lovett, and Lucinda Williams. Earle took his worship of Van Zandt public, allowing his assessment that Townes Van Zandt is the best songwriter in the world, and I'll stand on Bob Dylan's coffee table in my cowboy boots and say that. Was to be stickered on the cover of Van Zandt's 1987 LP At My Window. I think Townes was actually embarrassed by that, and that's the much overused quote, but it's fun, so what the hell? And it's the one everybody says anymore. But we continue on to the next page, and it says, Battle with Alcohol. New York Times writer Robert Palmer drew out the parallels between Van Zandt and his hero, Hank Williams, in a June 7, 1987 article. Both men live in their music, as if singing and writing and being human were the same thing and as natural as breathing, Palmer wrote. He described the music of both Williams and Van Zandt as the direct, untrammeled expression of a man's soul. Common trait between the two songwriting beacons of different eras was an affinity for alcohol and drugs. Van Zandt's battle with the bottle was ongoing as he slipped in and out of sobriety, sometimes during the break between sets. But even as he slurred the cornball jokes that he used as comic relief, Van Zandt was capable of compelling musical performances with such down-and-out songs as Marie, Tower Song, Still Looking for You, appropriately darkened by Van Zandt's state. The songs were always there, said Griff Lundberg, manager of the Cactus Cafe, which hosted countless Van Zandt concerts. No matter what shape Townes was in, he had songs, and that's what people came to hear. Lundberg recalls Van Zandt's final Austin show at the Cactus on October 12th as pure magic. It was a classic Townes show, Lundberg said, almost too choked up to talk. The audience hung on every word, and they sent back this huge outpouring of appreciation after every song. They even laughed at his jokes, which are the same jokes he'd been telling for 20 years. On a good night, Van Zandt packed the charm of a brilliant rascal. Although his career was on an upswing, especially in Europe, Van Zandt's health had been unstable in recent years. At the time of his death, he was at home in the Nashville suburb of Smyrna, recuperating from hip surgery, but his drinking was the cause of most concern. This is a quote from Jerry Jeff Walker. Jerry Jeff says, I had expected a call about Townes for a few years. Today I got that call. It's still very sad when it comes. That's pretty damn heavy. But I want to go back to Griff Lundberg. Griff managed the Cactus Cafe in Austin. It's great, great gig. Like listening room. I don't know how many it held. 80 people, maybe 100. I'm not really sure, but people sat there quietly. Just a really, really great gig. But not a huge audience. You know, you're not a huge performer, but to be in the audience there and see somebody that you really dig, it's exactly the kind of place you want to see your favorite acoustic artists, you know. And I played at the Cactus a few times. I didn't know Griff very well, but he was really nice to me. And we'd go back in the back room, and I remember me and Griff and Jimmy LaFave back there one night, and I just kept asking Griff, tell me more Townes stories. I want to hear some Townes stories, you know. And he'd tell me stuff. And I remember him saying, this is what stuck out most. There was a couple things that stuck out, and I think I can share this. But the movie had just come out. You know, the Townes documentary, the movie, and I drove to Nashville to see the premiere of it. This was before I lived in Nashville and at the Belcourt Theater. And I asked Griff about it, and he didn't really like it that much. He said it was just all so dark. And he said that Townes to him I hope I'm not betraying a trust. I think this isn't like a big public thing or a private thing. But he just said Towns was so fun to be around. He was a really just enjoyed. He would, tell jokes and you'd laugh, and he was a really fun guy. And he had that dark side, and it was part of it. But he wished that there would have been more of the guy that was just fun to be around and liked having a good time and laughing with you. Remember, that stuck with me from Griff. And I had actually reached out and asked a couple people, where's Griff these days? And I don't know if he's still in Austin. Somebody said he might have moved back to Houston. I don't know where he's at. Does anybody out there watching this know where Griff's at? I'd like to look him up sometime and maybe interview him for the channel. So I think his stories would be wonderful. But anyway, I wanted to jump back to that. But Jerry Jeff Walker said, I had expected a call about Towns for a few years. Today I got that call. It's still very sad when it comes. It says Drifter Stories. He was born John Towns Van Zandt in Fort Worth on March 7th, 1944. While he was raised in a prominent Texas oil family, Van Zandt began his rebel ways as a teenager, picking up the guitar after seeing Elvis Presley on TV, then later expanding his influences to include Woody Guthrie and Lightnin' Hopkins. Man, how many people saw Elvis on television, on the Ed Sullivan Show, whatever, and just how much great music came to us because someone saw Elvis on TV, or the Beatles. It's just amazing to me. Towns Van Zandt, inspired by Elvis. Soon after high school, the gaunt songwriter ran from the mansion on the hill to the railroad tracks, from comfort to danger, and started writing songs about the desperate drifters and life's losers he met in his travels. He was a completely ornery guy, said longtime friend and fan Joe Ely. He didn't seem to do anything for any reason except for the purpose of writing another song. He came on this earth to play music, and it didn't matter what shape he was in. He always damn well fulfilled his goal, and he affected a lot of people by doing it. The brilliant yet approachable Van Zandt was a magnet for other musical storytellers, and he helped establish the couch circuit for drifting musicians. That is beautiful. He shared a lot of himself on stage, and when he stepped off, the songwriting community was there to share what they could with him. I really honestly believe Towns was one of the main reasons Austin received a reputation for quality, said Jimmy Dale Gilmore. Van Zandt provided not only the link between Hank Williams and Bruce Springsteen, but between people who shared appreciation for him. Like Jimmy Dale Gilmore and Joe Ely might seem to have been tight since junior high in Lubbock, but it was Van Zandt who helped solidify the musical partnership. Gilmore said he and Ely had been on only occasional acquaintances until the day Ely called him up and told him about a hitchhiker he picked up who had a backpack full of his own records. I've heard in interviews and I think in stage stories, I've heard Ely and Butch Hancock and Jimmy Dale Gilmore tell this story, and it's pretty damn great when they expound on it farther. There's probably clips of that somewhere out there on YouTube, but it's worth looking up. But Joe called me up and said, you got to hear this. And of course, it was Towns Van Zandt's record, Our Mother the Mountain, Jimmy Dale Gilmore said. I think what affected us most was the intelligence of it. And I guess you could say that was the catalyst for a lifelong friendship and appreciation for Van Zandt's music. Now imagine, 1970, 69, something like that. You pick up a hitchhiker on the road, and the hitchhiker actually has an album. And anybody who had an album in 1970, that was a big deal. You didn't just make records. There weren't that many people who could negotiate everything to have an actual album with their name on it made. That'd be a big deal. You picked up a hitchhiker and they have an album, and then you actually put it on, and it's freaking great. I can imagine how that would hit you. That would hit you today if a hitchhiker gave you the CD or something and it was great, but especially if they're hitchhiking with vinyl. That's a new hipster band for those of you out there. I'm sure they're rehearsing in East Nashville right now. Hitchhiking with Vinyl coming your way. Playing a basement show near you soon. But it says Van Zandt's influence on Nashville, where his songs have been recorded by Emmylou Harris, Doc Watson, Steve Earle, and others, was almost as strong as in Texas. The people he had an influence on in Nashville were the ones who broke the rules, and they're the people who truly matter, said veteran singer Jonelle Moser, who recorded Around Towns, a soulful tribute to the singer early last year. Again, this was 1997. The songs are always there, providing some comfort in the grief, and one in particular found Van Zandt looking back with some satisfaction on a life like none other. On a song for you, the lead-off track for his most recent CD, 1994's No Deeper Blue, Van Zandt sang, London to Dublin, Australia to Perth, I gazed at your sky, I tasted your earth, sung out my heart for what it was worth, never again shall I ramble. Funeral arrangements are pending, but Moser said she's been told that there will be a memorial service Sunday at 3 p.m. in Nashville. A little side note, I've seen Jonelle play in Nashville, and man, she's great. I mean, she's really, really great. And she'd actually like walked up and said hi a couple times. I don't know her. And I wanted to like, hey, how you doing? Tell me some stories. And it's nice to see you. And then it was quick and went on. Didn't want to bother her, but it's fun to see it's mentioned here. But there's a picture here of the front of Stubbs in this article. There's a sign out in front of Stubbs Barbecue there in the Red River area of Austin that says, goodbye towns, we love you. And it's just a really nice picture. And it reminds me of Austin in 1997, 96 or whatever, which was I still love Austin, but it was pretty damn neat for me at those particular years. But, like I asked you earlier, I'm hoping you'll listen to Towns today. You might listen to Towns every day. I don't know. But if you're going to go for something, what are you going to listen to? If I had to pick a studio album, it would be At My Window. And I just like that. I believe that I'm trying to think of what songs. That's what Catfish song at the end of it, I believe. One of my favorite, songs. I believe that they're still doing Towns tributes in different places across America today. I talked in a video a couple years ago about doing one in Louisville. I played the Catfish song. It was at Air Devils, and it was a really good time. I just drove down and played 2 songs. I played Catfish song and Don't You Take It So Bad, and it was really, really nice. And I met one of Towns' old friends there, Jimmy Jingle, who was in the audience, and was a very nice guy and told me some rather amazing stories, and never crossed paths with him again. That's kind of how life works. But are there any Towns tributes in your town? And if you're listening to Towns today, what are you listening to? Last thing I'll say about At My Window, the cover of that with Towns standing in front of a window, looks like there's a sink behind him or whatever. I walked into Cowboy Jack's kitchen. I was in his recording studio in his home, or the Cowboy Arms Hotel. However many, I think it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I just kind of like looked in the kitchen and I was just looking at the window and I thought, I had to ask, is that the window Towns is standing in front of on that album cover? And whoever I asked said, yes, it's exactly where that photo was taken. And I got to go back in, and there's I interviewed Sean Camp last year, which a lot of you have seen that here. While I was there, I said that to Sean, and he's like, yep, that's exactly where that, the album was recorded there by Cowboy Jack. And that window was there. So we took a couple quick selfies, pictures or whatever I made a little quick video of Sean standing in front of that window. It's been remodeled, so it doesn't look the same, but it's really weird when you just look at it. You're kind of like, I think that's the window. And it was. And sometimes you're so far down the rabbit hole that you're hopeless and you notice things like that. I think a lot of you would notice it. So if I was listening to a studio album, it would be at my window. And if not, I would go for a rearview mirror. If that was the first one I had, and then maybe Live from the Old Quarter and Highway Kind. Those are the ones I would go for right off the bat. In those orders, probably. What would you listen to? And anyway, I have a lot of stuff on this channel. If it's your first time hearing, there's a lot of interviews I've done with people who have known Towns, worked with him, opened for him. Some great stuff from John Lomax, my buddy John Lomax, who was Towns Van Zandt's manager. And he told some great stories, but I made a playlist of that, and it's up here, and I'm hoping you guys will watch some of that. And I will talk to you soon, and Happy New Year. This is going to be the best year ever. I promise. Much love to you.